Hey, welcome to Wonderful Works Talks, where we talk all about the disability ministry mission of helping churches become accessible for all. I'm your host, Barb Stanley, and today we're going to dive into a topic that we need to be talking about more when it comes to disability ministry, and that is, what does it look like in a small church? And guess what? Whether you're part of a small church or not, you need to pay attention to this conversation, because according to Lifeway research from 2022, 2 in 3 Protestant churches, that's 68%, have congregations of fewer than 100 people, including 31% of those that have fewer than 50 people, which means that the majority of churches in America are small churches. So if you care about accessible church, then you care about the small church. Which is why I'm so excited to talk to our 2 guests, Disability Ministry Coordinator for the Church of Nazarene and our Wonderful Works partner, Pastor Ryan Nelson, as well as my friend and small church pastor from the United Methodist Church, Reverend Shannon Blosser. But before we get to that, I want to stop and ask a question. Do you believe that disability ministry is one size fits all? And if not, how can churches find their own fit? Well, today we're going to talk about that and so much more, so join us as we learn what are the perceived roadblocks that keep disability ministry out of many small churches, why it's important to embrace dumb questions, and how to plant the seeds of culture change in any size church. So without further ado, please join me as we welcome our guests, Pastor Ryan Nelson and Reverend Shannon Blosser. We are so excited today to be talking about disability ministry in the context of small churches and how we can all be inclusive no matter the size. And I'm thrilled to be talking to 2 of my friends here, Pastor Ryan Nelson from the Church of Nazarene and Pastor Shannon Blosser from the United Methodist Church. So thank you guys for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
So as we dive into this topic, can you guys tell me why each of you is so passionate about disability inclusion, especially equipping the smaller sized churches? Shannon, you want to start?
Sure. For me, why I'm passionate about disability ministry, I have a son. My oldest son is autistic, and obviously, he's my pride and joy, and I'd do anything for him, and also his younger brother. They were both born in the church, and I have seen them both treated differently based upon perceptions about who they are and what they can do and what they can't do. And as a pastor, that breaks your heart.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you start having those experiences and those walls that come up simply because your child has a disability, it makes you more passionate for the welcome of others and the kingdom embrace. And so I think that started it. And for me, with the small church, I love the small church. For me, I love being in a church where I can old cheer song where everybody knows your name.
Yeah.
That personal relationship is so important. And I think it's crucial to have that. So those are the 2 things for me that kind of put me where I'm at.
And Ryan, what about you?
Yeah, I would say kind of a twofold answer as well. I'd start off with the Lord really stirred within my heart just a passion for special needs. It started out, my degree is actually in special education, and I didn't start off that way. That was not my life goal, not my plan, but that's what the Lord just stirred within me. And so I made that change when I was in college, and I shifted my degree plan and went that route. And God's just been orchestrating as I've tried to follow Him. And so He's just put that passion in my heart for people impacted by disabilities. And I don't even like to say it that way. As we've started ministries within our own church, I find myself using the phrase that God is a God for all abilities. And even our ministries that we may design with disability ministry in mind, it's really a ministry for people of all abilities.
Right.
And so that's a phrase that I've just been it's been floating around in my head some that I've been kind of tinkering with. The other part of that is I grew up, my mother is visually impaired. So growing up, that was just normal. We didn't even call it anything. I mean, it was just life. We just did life like everybody else. And it wasn't until I was older, and I mean, I was probably in middle school before I really recognized how hard my mom had to work to really do church the way God was asking her to do church. I mean, she is a Sunday school teacher to this day. And just the amount of effort and time and all of those things that she puts into it to follow Jesus. Man, what an inspiration that is to me. And so, growing up, being around that, and being a witness to that, and just seeing how passionate my mother is about Christ, and just thinking, you know, this is the kind of relationship that God wants with everybody. And so, that just really stirs within me that passion to see, not the rich, not the poor, but everyone have that kind of relationship with Christ.
So, with disability ministry and creating, we're going to talk about one of the things you said in a minute here, Ryan, which was creating spaces for all abilities. We sometimes call that universal design, which is a big part that all churches can do. But when we're talking specifically about disability ministry, kind of resources and strategies that are out there now, a lot of times it seems like they are more geared towards larger sized churches. And when we're talking about small church versus large sized church, we're kind of going off the definition of like a smaller church would be 100 or 75 people or less, and a medium to large size church would be a couple hundred, over 100. So when we're having these small churches, which my understanding is that's the majority of churches in the United States are small churches, it seems like a lot of things that we are talking about aren't always super accessible to smaller size churches. Can one of you tell us what specifically is hard if you're a small church looking to do disability inclusion?
I'll just jump in and just say I think I'm going to phrase it this way. I think one of the fears of a smaller church is always, how much is this going to cost us?
Yeah.
I think and that's not a knock on those churches. I think that they are just cognizant of their financial restraints, and where they can have the flexibility to spend money and where they don't. And
Yeah.
I think that oftentimes we see these incredible resources come out that, just to put it bluntly, they're not always affordable for the smaller churches. And I
Right.
think that's always something that's on the mind of those smaller churches, is what can we afford to do, and how many dollars are we talking here? So I think that's one part of this.
I think that's definitely one part of it. I think, to build on what both of you are saying, when those resources come out
Hmm.
and they're obviously written by a larger church, or they're geared towards a larger church, or someone that has a disability coordinator on staff, or a volunteer disability coordinator on staff, it is like a deer in the headlights for the small church that's just trying to figure out who's going to be the lay reader on a Sunday, or the person that's wearing multiple hats. And so already when they have an inferiority complex, I know in my church all the time I hear about the big church down the street.
Hmm.
If we could just be like them, we would have all of our problems solved. And I keep telling folks, they've got problems too.
Yeah.
Right.
But that inferiority complex of, we're too small to do this, we're not good enough, we're too small, we don't have the money, we don't have this, we don't have that. We create these roadblocks that we don't necessarily need to do.
Right.
And so when you already have that inferiority complex and you start comparing yourself, like here, to the big mega church down the street, or the larger Catholic church, or whomever it may be, when you see these resources come out, or the conferences or the other events, and saying, take this 5-point strategy home and you will grow your church, it's not for us.
Right.
Because there's no one really that's speaking to that inferiority complex, or that fear, or finance guy who's also wearing the trustee's hat, and
Hmm.
not understanding the small church creates that other roadblock too. So it's
Hmm.
not just the inferiority complex, it's also people that don't appreciate or understand the
Yeah.
value of the small church and want to just kind of eliminate them, because they're too small for us. I think that doesn't help. There's
Yeah.
value in the small church. It is, the beautiful creation of God, just like anything else. But
Right.
Yeah.
those hurt on both sides of the argument.
Yeah. For sure, there's value in the small church. There's value in every size church
Mhm.
because there's every type of person, and you need to go where is good for you. So, what I'm hearing kind of both of you say is there's a mindset like either you have to have a big program or you have nothing.
Right.
And so a lot of the resources that are out there make church leaders sometimes feel like they have to have the whole program.
Right.
So, and we know that's not true.
Right.
So, from both of your experiences, because you both have disability ministry in the churches that you have led, how have you found how to be inclusive without having a disability ministry coordinator or an entire team of experts?
I'm just going to jump in and start out by saying the first thing that we ever did as a church is we just began to pray.
Okay.
And I think that's probably, in my opinion, that's the most important thing the church can do is just pray
Mm-hmm.
and just begin to really seek the Lord out and really seek what God wants to do through your church. I've never been a pastor who just kind of goes in and bulldozes and says, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
I'm always one who wants to lead in prayer and just say, what is it that God's asking us to do? Because that's really what matters. And no matter the size of the church, that's really what matters is what does God want to do in the
Right.
church? And we've just been fortunate that God has opened the doors for us to have that type of ministry, no matter our church size.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when we go into it seeking God first,
Mm-hmm.
I think that shifts our mindset some. You're always going to have those in your church who see the dollars, who see the inferiority, who see the church down the street. They always see the greener pasture. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But I think that when we begin to seek out the Lord and His plans first, it does shift our mindset. And that's a huge place to start because we've got to have that happen in our
Yeah.
churches.
Yeah, I agree. I'm in a different situation in a way simply because of how my denomination works within my, with being a pastor, in that when I'm appointed to a church, whether you had it before or not, you get a disability ministry because of my child.
Right.
And so from that moment when the bishop appoints me to a church, you have now become a disability ministry church.
Yeah.
Right.
And so for us, it starts in the very initial conversation when, so I'm new to my church where I'm at right now. And so last January, when I'm introduced to the staff parish relations team and, hey, it's our new pastor, I'll be like, hey, by the way, my son's autistic.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? Well, we're going to talk about it over the next several weeks. We're going to talk about it over the next several months. Letting people know that you're going to get a disability ministry with me. That opens up the conversations for what does this look like. So I recognize I'm a unique duck in this. But for us, the way we do it then is we try to have conversations with folks. Because the first thing I hear almost always is it too hard? You must have too much on your plate. Did vaccines cause this? And you just go, breathe, breathe. But then you say, we're going to have some conversations. We're going to have some conversations. We're going to talk about what autism actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have some I call it a town hall discussion where I bring anyone in that wants to learn about autism and how to be a more autistic friendly church. And we have a conversation. And I let people ask all the dumb questions and ask all the questions that afterwards you want to beat your head up on the steering wheel when you drive home and go, I cannot believe church people would ask this question.
Uh-huh.
But you let them get it out.
Yeah.
And you let them ask it. And then you go at the end, and this is what we did here. Wouldn't it be great if my son wasn't the only one welcomed in this church simply because they have a disability? So for us, it's that ongoing conversation and then helping people to let go of their fear. Now, there's still a lot of fear. You can't always get through with everybody. But conversing with folks, talking with people, letting them ask their stupid questions, that helps people to let go down their guard.
Yeah.
And then see that person as a child of God and a person of sacred and holy worth.
Wow. Well, you guys both just said so many things. I want to go back and unpack a little bit. So, Ryan, what I'm hearing from you is from the leadership's perspective, you're coming at it like you're getting prepared for people to come in who may have disabilities, right? So you're starting with the mind shift and getting the leadership on board. And then Shannon, you already have that with you, and you're having to get the congregation on board. So I want to stop here for a second because, full disclosure, I have never been a member of a small church. So I'm learning a lot along with everybody. But what I'm imagining is the smaller the congregation, the more input the congregation has on what initiatives come and what doesn't. So that is a big difference right in itself, probably from other disability ministry initiatives at larger churches, which is more top down. So can you guys talk, let's say once you get the leadership on board and you've changed your mindset, how would you then bring this up to your church and get buy-in from your congregation?
I think for me, take Noah out of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You have to start it somewhere. And I recognize every week I have a undivided attention. Now I say undivided, I see you playing with your cell phone when, the sermon goes a little too long. But I've used that sermon a lot to start the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
to start vision casting. And you don't just let out a vision once. You have to do it multiple times and to get it into people's head. And so talking in that sermon, using passages, like the woman who goes to Jesus and says, look, I'll take even the crumbs. I've used that before to say, folks with disabilities are just happy to get crumbs because we don't know what it's like to get even a full loaf of bread sometimes. We'll just take crumbs. Using those moments in the sermon and then using in our council meetings that pastor's report that I get to talk about where are we going, casting that vision. You set that vision in that role. You get that buy-in from others to then they get it themselves, they capture it. And then you start getting people who have no clue about how to care for people with disabilities saying, how can I help? So you have to keep catching it and casting it, catching and catching. I remember Andy Stanley once talking about the idea of fishing, and I'm not a good fisherman, but you cast it out, bring it back in, cast it, bring it back out, just to catch something. And that's kind of what you have to do in a small church is just keep talking about it and encouraging people to say, yes, we can do this. For me, that guides the conversation where you get people involved. And if you can get 2 or 3, 4 people in a group, then you start empowering them to say, here's your part of this, here's your part of this. And for a lot of times, especially here, you see people take ownership in something for the first time where it's not doing the same old song and dance we've done for the last 50 years. This is something new and fresh and exciting. And then it starts getting the whole church excited.
Mm-hmm. So I'm hearing you say you plant a lot of seeds everywhere you can.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you see the people who are grasping onto those seeds, or sometimes even maybe the influencers in your church, once they catch the vision, then that helps bring the rest of the congregation into the mission.
Yeah, it does. And for us, and then, when they start seeing the fruit, when they start seeing things happen, then it gets other people more excited. For us, we have a buddy program.
Mm-hmm.
We have someone that's assigned that when Noah is here, she hangs out with Noah. We celebrated that yesterday in a council meeting because they saw a win that my wife being able to stay in the sanctuary instead of going to children's church.
Yeah.
So allowing people to claim the wins.
Yes. Amen.
Creates more seat opportunities.
So Ryan, let me ask you. So one of the things you talked about, Shannon, was you get the general people on board with the mission, but then you have to kind of go down to what is the next call to action. And that's going to look different for every church because, again, we're not talking about making a giant program. You're not going to have a respite night and a buddy program and an outreach. You can't do all those things. So how do you decide what is the first step you're going to take?
I think that it looks so different. One thing I love about disability ministry is it's not a cookie cutter ministry.
Right.
And so it's not just going to be a one size fits all. This is what it's going to look like. This is what it's going to be like, because that's not true.
Right.
But I think this is what I would say. The best parts of disability ministry, in my opinion, are free.
Yeah.
And they're the same parts. It goes back to God is a God of all abilities.
Right.
And to me, the best parts of disability ministry is the fact that we get to see people. Instead of seeing a disability, we actually get to see people.
Mm-hmm.
We get to love people.
Mm-hmm.
And we get to share life with people.
Right.
All of those are free. And we have the opportunity to do that with everybody.
Right.
And I think that that's part of that mindset, that shift that begins to happen is that we begin to see people and interact with people. I'm going to phrase it this way, more like Jesus. And I think that's important. And I think that that's one of the foundational steps that we've taken within our churches that we've been in is just really doing a I don't know if you want to call it a teaching and education. I don't know what you want to call that, but it's really getting that as part of the lifeblood of the church, that we want to see whoever it is that walks through the door. We don't want to see their clothes. We don't see their car. We don't want to see their disability. We want to see the person. We want to
Yes.
love the person, and we want to
Yeah.
share life with the person.
I
And
love it.
so
Yeah.
that's something that we try to breathe into the life of the church, so where that's just who we are as a church. And then when it comes to like the inner workings of like what we're actually going to do, in our first church where we had 19 people, we just set up a system where we had buddy boxes available for when people would come in, and we assigned one or two people who were in charge of making sure that buddy boxes got to where buddy boxes needed to go. And so, a lot of that is just, I don't know, coaching and education about how we're going to do this and what it's going to look like, and those types of things. And I think that it's similar to what Shannon was saying. In our context, we work with church boards, and so it starts kind of in that space where we're working together with our church board and vision casting and dreaming, and then it has to get out of that space. It can't just stay there. And so in our context, we really relied on our church leaders, our church board, to help us expand this out of our little circle into the bigger circle.
Yeah.
And sometimes that circle may be the same circle if you're a small church, but
Yeah.
you just have to work on getting it out of that room, so to speak. You have your place that you meet with your council or your board or whatever. The ideas have to get out of that room. And one thing the Nazarene Church is talking a lot about now is getting it to the pew. And I think that's important in this context, is that we've got to get it out of our meeting rooms and to the pews. And so that's where we rely on our council or our board members or whoever those people may be to help us get that dream and make it a reality.
Yeah. So I just want to point out for those that are listening, just to reiterate this, both of you have said the same thing. So once you get people on board, you find who are the influencers within that group, and you commission them, equip and empower them to spread it. Is that right?
Yes.
In addition to that, you want to plant seeds from the pulpit.
Yes.
So you hit on some things here, Ryan, I think are good to talk about. You mentioned buddy boxes. So for those who don't know what that is, that's usually like a box of supplies that help students that might need like a fidget or noise canceling headphones or some adaptions. You just have those already ready. But that goes in part of what we like to call universal design, which is where you are helping make your environment universally accessible for all people, regardless of their age or their size or their ability. And I think this is something that all churches, even super small churches, can do. And it's the first step to being an inclusive ministry. So, Shannon, do you want to tell us a little bit how you guys have done that in some of your churches?
I want to brag on this church because I don't think they realize here at Mount Olivet United Methodist that they have universal design already built within their context. The loving reasons they built onto their church about 25 years ago, created a new sanctuary and fellowship hall. And when they did it, they didn't put pews in, they put in stackable chairs to where you can change the setup every week. That is the best thing I've ever walked into with a sanctuary, to where we can move a chair around. We can widen rows. We can shorten rows. We can expand. I can bring in beanbag chairs. We have some beanbag chairs in for accessible seating. We have room to put mats down. We had a calm Christmas service. I had someone who laid on a mat the whole service. God bless them. It made them comfortable.
Right.
And so I can move the pulpit out. The pulpit's not stuck. We can do these things and change the setup. We can turn the lights. We can adjust lighting to give it a calmer setting. We can do these things already because it's enriched within our structure. In some other places, I've seen people take out a pew or take out some rows to do that. It's almost harder to do that when you're dealing with something that's already there.
Right.
And already present, because that's somebody's great-great-grandmother that sat in that pew 100 years ago. And if you take out my great-great-grandmother's pew, then we got a problem. I say that knowing I've been talking all the last few days about my great-grandmother's pew in the back of Perry Memorial United Methodist Church in Shady Spring, West Virginia. How I get upset if someone's sitting in that pew, even though I've not been in that church in 7-8 years. But in churches that haven't had that ability to maybe create a new space, it's harder to adapt sometimes to a universal design. And so you're almost asking folks to start over. But what you need to do is, what can you do? Can you move
Yes.
out a pew? Can you look at a buddy box? Can you look at something that can make it more accessible? Do you need to have the volume all the way up?
No, you
Can
don't.
you turn it all the way down? Those are things you can do even if you have a pew that's bolted into the hardwood floors and you can't get it out because it's rotted in.
Yeah.
Um, so I've seen it from both ends. The church that has struggled to adapt, and I've
Mhm.
seen it here where I'm very blessed that I can walk into the sanctuary right now and change up the pews or the chairs, and I
Yeah.
don't think anybody would notice.
I'm guessing that the churches that struggle to adapt to universal design, again, universal design is just making small changes that make it easier for anyone. They're crucial for some, but they work for all. I'm guessing the churches that struggle with this aren't asking people what would be helpful. Is that normally true?
They assume what
Yeah.
would be helpful.
Yes.
I've run into this, and I don't know about you, Ryan, but I know I've run into a lot of well-minded people that
Hmm.
you just want to use the Southern phrase of "bless your heart," and I hope you all know what that means. I'm not going to quote it, but I'm sure you all know what it means. Um, that will come up to you and go, "This is what you need."
Uh-huh.
And sometimes it's the worst folks are the ones who have, no offense, Ryan, but the high degrees and have studied all of it, and they don't want to go beyond what they've learned instead of putting that application into that application side. And
Hmm.
those are sometimes the harder people to reach in a small church.
Hmm.
I call them the I know betters because they don't want to see the real life experience and they never stop and say, how can we be the body of Christ for you?
Hmm.
How can we be that church for you? We may not be able to change everything, but what can we adapt to make it work for you?
I think you hit the nail on the head with the word assume, is I think that a lot of us think we know more than we do about things that we don't have lived experience in. And one thing I have learned from doing this disability ministry, for the past 10 years is I don't know that much. Like no matter how much I learn, there's so much more to learn. And this was like for me a really big eye opener. A couple years ago, we did a training video on accessible mobility in the church. And so I interviewed a lot of people who were in wheelchairs and their families were in wheelchairs. And there were things I didn't even know were things. And so when you're talking about just making some small adaptations at your church, it's really important to invite the people in that it is their lived experience because I guarantee you, you don't know as much as you think you do.
Yeah.
So, Ryan, what other type of things does your church do to try to be more accessible for all abilities?
We do some small things like I mean we Shannon hit just about everything just spot
Yes.
on. A couple of things that we do that he didn't talk about, and they probably do them anyway.
Yeah.
But we also have like visual schedules out so that people can see what's happening when it's happening. And I know in our children's church we have a visual timer so that when they're doing activities they can put that visual timer in that. Those are just some small helpful things that we've added in addition to what Shannon has said. And like I said, I'm sure their church is doing those things as well. But I would just say I'm just going to tack this on. I think that church, no matter the size, one thing that's so hard about churches is churches are some of the best places where you find we're going to do it this way because it's the way it's always been done. Again, that's not just a small church thing; that's an all church thing where you
Right.
you uncover that we just do it this way because we've always done it this way, and so learning to overcome those things and it's so important. I love it. Both of you have said this several times now that it takes all of us. That as a pastor, we can't just go in and say, "Oh, we're removing this row, we're taking this out," because that's a great way to have some church hurt. But involving people in those discussions and having those conversations before we just upend things
Mhm.
goes a long ways. And I always encourage people, start small. And
Mhm.
you guys hit some of the bigger ones. Talking about the volume in the room.
Mhm.
Start small and work your way from there.
So you start with trying to do universal design where you're trying to make it easier for everyone. But what about when someone does come to your church? And let's say you're a church of 50, so you don't have like tons of volunteers available. You may not have all of the policies and structures in place that maybe you wished you did. How do you meet that person's individual needs, Ryan?
Well, I'm just going to start. I'll give this example, and I'll use the name Anne. How about that? So
Okay.
I'll talk about Anne. In our church, when our very first church, we had 19 people,
Mhm.
and Anne started coming to church.
Mhm.
And I don't know all of Anne's backstory. I wish I did. But Anne was an older lady who had some developmental things going on. And I would say the first thing that we did is we just saw Anne. I don't know how else to say that. We just saw her as a person,
Mhm.
and we just saw that, she was coming to church. We wanted her in church. I think one of the most important things we could ever do as the church is build relationships, right? And so we just
Mhm.
tried to build a relationship with Anne.
Mhm.
And as we worked to build a relationship with Anne, we began, it's kind of like an onion. We began to peel back these layers and to learn the things that we should be doing. And that's a big part of it is we just have to be willing to learn. And we
Right.
were willing to learn about Anne's needs and how we could and how we couldn't. We're not always able to meet the need,
Right.
but we're able to learn that. And I think it just begins with seeing them and building a relationship with them in which you can begin to learn the things that you don't know because we don't know what we don't know. And that's where we started with Anne. And I think that that's true oftentimes when a new face walks into the door. We're not going to immediately know, oh, we should be doing XYZ.
Right.
And so we're going to have to build those relationships. And Barb, one of the things I've heard you say before is, when you're talking about children, especially, your greatest asset is the parents or the caregivers because they
Right.
know their child best. And
Right.
so it's important to have those conversations with those people who can equip you and tell you this is what works and oh, don't do this. And
Right.
so I think that we have to be cognizant that there has to be a willingness to learn.
Yeah.
Um, and the danger of assuming.
Agreed. And Shannon, I'm gonna change this question a little bit for you. But as a parent, what do you wish people would ask you if you, and not even at your own church, but let's say you're taking your son somewhere that isn't accessible but needs to be for him? What would you want them to ask you?
I would want them to ask me, what do you do at home? What's daily life like? And how can we care for him?
Mm-hmm.
I think for us, also to talking with him, he has the right to say no. He has the right to say what he wants and what he doesn't want. It gets to my nerves sometimes when he tells me no, but he's allowed to say no.
Yeah.
Uh, but also asking him, what do you like? And allow him to either express it in the ways that he expresses it through song or through quoting different shows or using his talker. To me, treating him with value. Don't talk past him.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to him. When he becomes an adult, don't treat him like a child.
Mm-hmm.
Treat him like an adult. Treat him as a child with as sacred worth, a child of God with sacred worth. But ask the questions. Ask fair questions. Don't come to me as a parent and make assumptions of what I need to do at home. You'll push me away if you do that. I had a staff member at one church, a staff member. I
Mm-hmm.
was their boss, and they said this to me: "You need to spank the autism out of your child."
What?
A staff member come up to me and say, "You should spank the autism out of your child."
That's nuts. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. That's insane.
It is. It was very hurtful. I won't say how
Dang.
much longer I was at that church after that.
Probably the afternoon, I'm guessing.
I had to finish my appointment here.
Huh.
I serve at the pleasure of the bishop, folks.
Yeah.
But don't come to us with your assumptions. Don't come to me with your vaccination conspiracy theories. Don't come to me with, I can't believe you let your son eat French fries all day long.
Mm-hmm.
Don't come to me with that stuff.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
If you start questioning me about how I raise my child or how we care for his needs, not even just as a parent, you lose me as your pastor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've left churches because we've been hurt,
Yeah.
because they saw my child as a burden.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how hard it is to look at someone you are called pastorally to love that just said to you, you need to leave for your child, or we're not going to do the things that would help your child that could take away from someone else. Things I've heard in the small church.
Yeah.
Those, I'm stuck. I'm your pastor.
Right.
You know, I might go to my district superintendent afterwards and says, hey, if there's an appointment available next year, I'd be
Yeah.
open.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
But I guarantee you, you do that to someone that's not your pastor, you'll
Mhm.
never see them again.
Yeah.
And the worst thing is, you have given them an impression about the church
Yep.
that we hate your child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that takes a long time to recover, even if you are a pastor.
That's right.
And if you're not a pastor, it takes even harder.
So this podcast is just audio, but I wish they could see you right now, Shannon, because I'm watching you on our little Zoom screen, and I can see that heaviness in you when you tell those stories.
Yeah.
So I want everyone that's listening right now to know you don't have to be perfect in the way you talk to people. You're not going to get everything right, and you're going to make mistakes. But check your heart first and ask yourself, if I were the parent, would this be helpful? Because nobody wants people assuming they know best for, how to parent their child, especially if it's someone with a child with a disability that this person's not even familiar with at all. And when we do that, when we are careless with our advice, because I think these people meant to be helpful, most of them were probably trying to be
Maybe
helpful.
not the one that said spank your child.
But okay, we'll put him to the side because I would think most people, they probably were trying to be helpful and they think they can fix your problem, and that is not helpful.
No, it actually pushes you away from people.
Right.
It pushes away from people, and if you do it at church, it's going to push you away from church.
And what's harder too within the small church is when that happens in the small church, everybody knows everybody. And if you mention, hey, X hurt me because of Y, oh, they didn't mean it.
Mhm.
You took it the wrong way. And then you become the problem. And that's harder. Because when you go to someone that maybe, in my case, my relations team, or
Mhm.
maybe, a church member who was hurt goes to their pastor and says, this person said this. Oh, they didn't mean it. Let it go. You're being too sensitive. No, it's my
Mhm.
child. You just said my child's not welcomed here. That's also hard to overcome.
Yeah, well, that sounds like you're feeling dismissed,
Yeah.
and that's certainly not the mission of the church.
So we got to get over that.
Yeah. So what has been helpful?
Yeah.
What strengths do the small church can have that has been helpful?
I have two churches right now. My smaller one, there are 8 people.
Mhm.
They're just happy they've got kids now. For the last few months, we've been preaching in this small room because our boiler is busted, and every time they come to fix it, it breaks again. My first Sunday there, they did a lot of healing. They
Mhm.
looked at me. My youngest ran up to me at the pulpit,
Mhm.
wanting to dance during the closing hymn, and I'm embarrassed because I'm thinking they're prim and proper. They're not going to like this. And they came up to me afterwards and said, "Shannon, we love your kids. Let them be." And now that we're in the conference room, a few weeks ago, I stopped the sermon because I lost eyesight. One of my kids decided he just needed to climb up the stairs and go into the back rooms of the church during the sermon, and
Yeah.
instead of staying in that conference room. And I had to stop because my wife was with our other child. And they're like, Shannon, it's okay. And I think for us, that church that has compassion,
Mhm.
which is prevalent in the small church, to see the person and say, we love you regardless,
Mhm.
and laugh at things and just allow things to go with the flow gives you more permission for your child to be who they are, or your adult to be who you are, or me to be who I am. So compassion goes a long way.
In my experience with the small church, I'm going to say it has two things. I'm going to say here: the small church has the greatest benefit of really opening up community and being community, even if it's a small community.
Yeah.
I've seen that. We've experienced that. It's such a beautiful thing. The flip side of that is small churches also have the danger of becoming the most closed community.
Right.
And we have to be aware of that. And I think that we have to be willing to take a temperature check and figure out, where are we and who are we? Are we this, we want to say we want to be this open community where people can come and feel welcome and all these things. but it's really easy to slide back into that closed community because we're comfortable with the people that we're with. We're comfortable that we do church this way with these people. They sit here, we sit there, and it's a beautiful thing. So I think it's important that we take a temperature check and have a reality check of where are we when it comes to when new people come, how welcoming are we really? Fortunately, my experiences in the small church has been one where they have just been so open when new people come in. They are just so welcoming, and it's just a beautiful thing.
So, Ryan, am I hearing you say that in your experience, introducing new people and new things has been relatively easy?
I'm going to say I've been fortunate to say that I've had good experiences, but that doesn't mean it was easy.
Yeah.
Our experiences were good simply because people were willing to try new things, and there was the buy-in behind it. There's always a lot of questions. I've had questions of, well, how is this going to change our church?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I mean, there are concerns when you start to do new things, whether it's a disability ministry or not. When you start to do new things, there's always the few, if you will, who are just gravely concerned about how it's going to shift or change the church that they know.
Right.
Uh, in my most recent context, I have families that are multi-generation in this church. I mean, we're talking 5, 6, 7 generations deep
Mhm.
into this church. And anytime that something new even began to rattle, they began to say, "Oh, how's this going to change things?
Mhm.
What's this going to look like? What does this mean for our church?" And you just have to be willing to have. I love what my wife says. We have to be willing to have hard conversations.
Yeah.
and,
Right.
and
Right.
so, while our experiences have been good, it hasn't that doesn't mean it's been easy getting there. And I
Yeah.
think that we have to be okay kind of trekking through some of the mud sometimes to
Mhm.
do what God's called us to do. And I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind is you're always going to have those people who are concerned, who question, who don't like change, who, all of those things. We've got to love them too, right?
Yeah.
We can't just get stuck loving the new people.
Right.
We've gotta love the old ones too. We've all gotta go on this journey together if it's ever gonna work, and that's a hard thing. That can be a hard thing, let me phrase it that
Yeah.
way.
I would imagine it would take a lot of grace. Like if you really feel passionate about a new initiative, or we're talking about here specifically disability inclusion and making changes, and you have a small congregation that is afraid of change, which happens a lot. It's going to take a lot of grace on your part as a leader to know, like, I'm going to keep loving this person through my frustration, and a lot of patience. And what I'm hearing and thinking is also coming back to that comparison trap. I understand that different churches are going to make changes at different paces
Right.
and that is okay. So, Ryan, your church did the Wonderfully Made service. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we just began to pray, we saw a need in our community, that we just saw that we have families with disabilities that nobody's really reaching out to, nobody's connecting with,
Mhm.
and so we just began to pray, "Lord, help us." We didn't want to just jump in and say, "Oh, we're going to do this." And I think oftentimes, this is one of my favorite phrases that I use. I think oftentimes where we find ourselves in churches is we pray, "God bless my mess" type prayers, where we
Yes.
make a decision to do something and then we say, "Oh, God bless it," instead of asking Him
Yes.
first. And
Right.
so we don't want to be in that boat. And so
Right.
we just begin to pray, "Before we get into the mess, Lord, why don't you lead us?"
Right.
And so we just began to pray, "Lord, help us think about and capture what it is that you want us to do to reach this population within our community that we just want to love on, we want to walk with, we want to share life with." And so we ended up doing what we called the Wonderfully Made service. It's a service that we put on every other month on a Wednesday night.
Mhm.
And I'll be really transparent about it. When we began dreaming about it and talking about it, we were all about disability. It's a service for families with disabilities.
Mhm.
And before we launched, I was really convicted about that. And I just it's I don't know what it was, but something just was stirring in me, just the language there, and I was like, I don't it's just not sitting right with me. And so I just spent some time with the Lord, and that's where we shifted our language
Mhm.
from a service for families with disabilities to a service for families of all abilities.
Mhm.
And that shift made a huge difference, not just for our community, but it made a huge difference for our church as well. And I think
Yeah.
it helped with church buy-in when
Yeah.
we phrased it that way and used that language. And it really turned into a beautiful thing. So on these Wednesday nights, what we would do is we would just have a highly interactive service designed to be family oriented. And so we would sing some like camp style songs, if you will. Um, I can't think of one right off the top of my head, but anyway, so we would do, your church camp style songs. Or what we did, if our college students were in town, so like over the summer, we had our college students lead those camp style songs. When our college kids weren't around, we did the great thing called YouTube, which worked great.
Yeah.
But either way, we would start off and we'd do some interactive camp style songs, and then we'd have a really short, like a 5-minute devotional type thing where we kind of hit like the main point, and then we had some interactive things for families to do together
Mhm.
that tied into that devotional, and then we would come back and close all together.
Mhm.
And the whole thing was designed to get families engaged in doing church and doing life together. And so all of our activities, it wasn't like we had one family. We put them in groups and these are all ability groups. We didn't put all of
Yeah.
our,
Mhm.
these families over here, these families over here. We
Right.
mixed our groups up and we had them go along and do different things. And it was just designed to have a space where families could come and worship without the fear of traditional church, without the fear of, are we going to sit in somebody's chair? Is the music going to be too loud? We did away with all of that. And we were very transparent with our church leading up to that and saying, hey, this is not going to be your traditional church service.
Mhm.
This is not going to be where we just come and sit and listen to somebody preach. We're going to be getting
Yeah.
up. We're going to be moving chairs. I mean, we
Yeah.
we did the whole thing. Give all the announcements. Say, hey, rows of chairs are going to be gone. Rows are going to be wider. We're going to be moving around the sanctuary. There's going to be games in the sanctuary. I mean, all of these things. And so it was just designed to be intentional to meet families of all abilities, and so that we could all do church together. And I
Mhm.
would just say one of my greatest fears in getting started with this ministry
Mhm.
was that our church wouldn't show up. That was
Yeah.
one of my fears, is that we would
Right.
have all these new families come, but we
Mhm.
wouldn't have any of our church families come. But I'm so thankful to say that our church did show up. And
Mhm.
so we had a community there for people to come into. It was really a beautiful thing. And we did a lot of, I don't know how in depth you want to go, but we did a lot of things. We did a lot of training with our people. People had specific jobs to make sure things would flow right. But I mean, our heart behind it was just to have a space for families of all abilities to come and to worship Jesus.
I love it. I feel like your mission that your church had gotten was every person is a child of God, made in the image of God, and we want every person here, and we want to value every person the way they were made. So what do we need to do to make that possible?
Mm.
That's what I'm hearing. Do you feel like maybe some of those seeds were planted along the way before you even talked about the Wonderfully Made service?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, just my heart as a pastor, everywhere I go, when I interact with people, I want to see the person that God created. Like, I mean, there's a lot of things that we could see about people, and there's a lot of ways that we identify people.
Mhm.
But my mentality as a pastor is I really want to see people for who God created them to be.
Right.
And so I think that we have a little bit of that trickle down effect because I mean, that just happens sometimes in church. When you have a leader, you take on certain aspects of that leader. I think that's
Right.
true.
Yeah.
But I think that God really softened the hearts of our people. And I just want to say this is a very important thing about not just our wonderfully made service, but I think this is a very important thing about church in general. We were very intentional about setting up people whose job was simply to greet people when they walked through the door
Yes.
and to do nothing else but to welcome them, thank them for being there. And I told them, your job is to see people, not from a security standpoint. You're not looking for weapons or you're not looking at them through that lens. Your job is to see people and to greet them like Jesus. And I
Mhm.
think that that is one of the most important things that we can do in church is have somebody set up for when people, old people, new people, whoever walks through the door, there's somebody there to greet them
Mhm.
and just express this welcome that you are welcome here.
I love that. And Shannon, that goes back to what you were saying about Noah. That's what you want, isn't it? People to see Noah not just his autism, but to see him and his value and his strengths.
Yeah, see him. I mean, recognize that he's autistic. That's a
Yeah.
part of who he is.
Right.
But see his value, see his worth, see that he is sacred, he is holy, see that he's a lovable child. Dance with him, sing his crazy little songs that he sings over and over again.
Uh-huh.
But see him.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
in go ahead,
I
Ryan.
want to tack on to the wonderfully made service because I want to encourage churches of all sizes. When we do our wonderfully made service, it doesn't cost us anything. We're moving chairs. It may cost us some time. We're moving chairs and things like that. We set up for some activities, but it doesn't cost us anything. We did add on to some things, that you say, oh, well, that costs money. But like we have weighted stuffed animals available.
Right.
But we took donations. We asked people to bring their old stuffed animals, and we spent some time putting some beans or some rice in them to have weighted, and we have those available at the front. But in order to do that service, we trained up our people. It didn't cost us anything. And so for those churches who are constantly in that fearful of, oh, we don't have the money to do this kind of thing, you can do it.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that. When we started our disability ministry at my church 10 years ago, we didn't really have a budget either. And most of the things you need to do to make church accessible for a family are free.
Right.
And it is a lot of mindset. It's a lot of being flexible and asking what adaptations do you need and then seeing what you can do.
I think we allow ourselves to get so overwhelmed with do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. Church is simple. We just make it complex. It's loving people. And so if we can just let people see that, but then affirm it, we have to affirm those good moments. We have to affirm the wins.
So speaking of wins, I was wondering if either of you had any stories to share about, in your experience with disability inclusion at your churches, that was a win, a big win, or maybe really changed someone's life or and strengthened their faith.
I'll share two quick stories. I'll go back to Anne that I mentioned earlier. Anne was challenging for our little church. She had needs, and we wanted to meet those needs, and she is very specific in her needs. My favorite thing about Anne, she got a hold of a church directory, and she would call everybody in the church directory, all 19 people, and she'd call everybody, and she had a specific thing that she wanted everybody to bring, but it wasn't like you would think. So she would call my mom, and she'd tell my mom, I want half an apple. And if my mom brought a whole apple, the world was going to explode. Like, that is not what. I say that funny story, but I say that because it was a win for our church because it's challenging for our church, but it was so good for our church to have Anne.
Yeah.
Because Anne forced us to think about things differently.
Yeah.
And she forced us to view situations, to view people differently. Anne was she was hard for our church at first, and we had to really do some learning with Anne. But she was so good for our church, and she was good for us as pastors to learn what it's like to minister to someone like Anne, who was just so unique and had unique needs, and who thought about life so differently. And what I love about Anne, and I'll move on to my second story. What I loved about Anne, she had all those unique things, kind of funny things where she wanted half an orange or like three slices, or, half an apple or 3 slices of an orange or whatever. But one of my favorite things about Anne was in Sunday school. Anne loved to read the Bible. And can I tell you, that was so good for our church to hear Anne read the Bible in Sunday school. Such a life-giving time for our church. The second one would be shorter. In our wonderfully made service, our December service, we did our whole service, and we're getting ready to wrap up at the end. And we had one of our associate pastors lead that. And at the end, she got up and she said, we're getting ready to pray and to go home, but I just want to know, does anybody want to pray? And you have that awkward silence, And we had a young girl who had just come to the service that night, her first time attending. And she raised her hand. She said, I pray. And she got up and she took the microphone and she simply prayed, Lord, Thank you that I got to come to church. Thank you that it was fun. Amen.
Yeah.
And can I tell you that wrecked my life to experience that and to have a child who just attended the service for the first time,
Wow.
willing to pray and to pray such a heartfelt and beautiful prayer. It wasn't grandiose in language or words, but it was so impactful. What a beautiful moment that was, and what a win that was for everyone. For everyone, what a great thing that was.
I love that. That's good. All right, Shannon.
That was good.
That was hard to follow, but you can do
Yeah, thanks, Ryan.
it.
All right, Shannon.
I'll share two quick stories. One happened just last December, couple weeks ago. We were doing what's called Calm Christmas. It's a sensory-friendly Christmas Eve service here.
Mhm.
We had a family come to that service with their adult autistic son, whom had not been in church for a year because they left the church hurt by things that were said at the last Christmas Eve worship to them by the pastor. To see their joy at being in a place that was being built with families in mind for them, to be in that worship service and to say, anytime you do something like this, we'll be here.
Yeah.
It, regardless of all the other people that were there that day, that was a moment of healing for them. The other one I think of, I was at this conference last year in DC with the ARC and some other organizations. And I just showed up as a parent wanting to learn more and wanting to also get outside the church bubble and learn from the other side of the world. I think too often we just stay in our church bubble when it comes to disabilities and not think
Yeah.
outside. I remember some people being nervous around me because I was a pastor,
Mhm.
because they had been hurt
Mhm.
by pastors. And by the end of the week, when I had to wear my clergy collar because we were on Capitol Hill, I saw them see joy in having a pastor with them, walking beside them.
Mhm.
So it was another moment of healing them, to where now, as I serve on some statewide boards with them, I'm
Mhm.
like the unofficial like chaplain for them, or you know,
Yeah.
we've become encouragers for each other. But at first, it was getting over that fear of having a pastor, because in the past they've had pastors treat them like kids, and that was a win for both of us. So
Yeah.
a learning moment, but also a healing moment. So you take
Yeah.
the wins and you claim them.
That's right.
That's
Can't
right.
beat Brian, but that's
Well, I think your story is beautiful too, because anytime you can have healing, I mean, we need more of that.
That's right. That's right.
So, if someone is interested in learning more about how they can become more disability accessible in their small church, where do you guys suggest that they go look?
um, wonderful works. Uh,
Mhm.
Team ministry, I think, is a good. I think also too, on my page at Autism Inclusion Mission. Um,
Say that louder. Say,
Autism Inclusion Mission. I don't like doing the humble brag.
I asked you. The
I
Autism
know, I
Inclusion
know.
Mission. That's
But
your what you're
I
doing.
try to focus in a lot on the small church within my Facebook world.
Mhm.
Those are the three areas I would look at, but also too, talk to other churches that are already doing it. Invite people to come to your church to talk who have experience doing these things.
Mhm.
Sometimes you learn more by sitting around the table and working it out than you do, downloading 5 articles.
That's great. Brian, what about you?
Well, as you know, I have the privilege of being partnered with you at Wonderful Works.
Woo!
And through our partnership, we have been able to create a free resource. I
Mhm.
think that it's important. I say that all the time,
Yeah.
free resource, library.wonderfulworksministry.org, where you can find training videos, you can find social narratives, you can find adapted Bible story videos and classroom tools, among other things. A great, great resource. And thank you to Wonderful Works Ministry for helping
Yeah.
us put that together. And the fact that it's free for anyone to use is a great thing. And we're excited that we have that to offer to all churches, to all families, and just encourage everyone to check it out, utilize it.
Mhm.
What a great resource it is. So
Well, that was a very good promo. Thank you, Ryan. But I feel very encouraged with this whole conversation. And what I'm hearing from you guys is that sometimes getting disability inclusion initiatives started at your church can be challenging, but it's always worth it. So, real quick, what is one encouragement that each of you can leave with anyone who is thinking about how can my church do this too?
You don't have to do all things, but you at least need to do something.
Very good.
Yeah, that's the phrase I use oftentimes at the end of any presentations that I do is we're not all going to be able to do everything, but we can all do something. And so I think it goes back to just ask the Lord, what is it that He's asking you to do? And just be willing. We need to have a willingness to do what God's calling us to do, whether it's just simply having buddy boxes available, whether it's having a special service, whether it's just simply turning the music down. We need to be willing to do whatever it is that God's calling us to do.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for being here today. This has been a great conversation, and I hope that it really starts launching some smaller churches into asking those questions. What can we do, and where do we need to start praying? So thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To learn more about disability ministry and the Church of Nazarene and to access some great and free resources, visit library.wonderfulworksministry.org. And to hear more from Reverend Shannon Blosser and his Autism Inclusion Mission, please visit shannonblosser.com or follow the Autism Inclusion Mission's Facebook page. And of course, to see what we've been working on at Wonderful Works, check us out at wonderfulworksministry.org. And don't forget, if you like this podcast, please follow and share with others. See you next time.